Hello. Just getting set up. So I'm just going to be hanging out for a minute, checking levels to make sure everything works. Can you hear me? Awesome. Fantastic. So good to see that there's low chat latency. Yeah, I didn't put in any latency in my settings, so hopefully I see questions pretty quickly as they pop up. Going to be getting started here in about 11 minutes. If you have Unity open and need help getting set up for ProBuilder and ProGrids, I can kind of walk people through that as y'all show up in case you don't know how to add that to your project. You know what? I switched to the wrong scene. Now we should have everything on screen. Awesome. Fantastic. Just like checking the stream video on my phone real quick and then was realizing, oh wait, none of those wonderful overlays that y'all made are showing up. I mean, the most important thing is seeing Unity, so at least you could see that before, but it's nice to see everything else too. Cool. Ooh, any ideas on what I want to work on for the slow jams? That's a good question. I don't have a very strong idea for any of them right now. I've been chatting with a couple folks about something for the horror game. We had like joked about this idea of like something that was kind of like a horror Animal Crossing. So that idea is kicking around, but other than that, no real strong ideas. I'm definitely interested in hearing if anybody else has strong ideas for what they want to do. Nasty little man crossing. Yes, that would be. We had this stupid idea the other day of like a multiplayer nasty little man where it's like a game of zombie where there you start out with like one nasty little man and one player who's trying to collect the effigy, and every time the player gets caught they turn into a nasty little man, so you just keep getting more and more nasty little men. We thought that that would be kind of like a funny idea. I don't think that we're going to make it, but we thought it was a funny idea. Oh, channel points. Yeah, I saw that PIGSquad has channel points and channel rewards. It's Nasty Little Man MMORPG. Uh, Flat Pig. What is Flat Pig? Yeah, channel points you get just for watching, and then you can like turn them in for rewards over time. I don't know what PIGSquad's rewards are though that y'all have set up in your. Let's see. Highlight my message, unlock random sub emote, send message in sub only mode, choose an emote to unlock, or modify a single emote. Those are the current ones that are. Oh, Flat Pig's very good. That's fantastic. I love that. We'll get started here in about 5 minutes. Flat Pigs in the chat. Oh man, it doesn't quite line up. Idiot Pig's good for that one. Oh yeah, that is a good comparison. Definitely like a dead Goomba. I mean, in terms of dimensions, Cube Pig is greater than Flat Pig, but I mean, emotionally, is Cube Pig better than Flat Pig? I don't know. Ah. Yeah, that makes sense. I thought you were passing a value judgment about which pig was better. A different perspective on life than regular. Yes, that seems like it must be true. What kind of turn-based games do you think you could make in Unity? That's a good question. I've not ever done anything turn-based in either Unity or I use GameMaker a lot. So I don't have like a very strong idea of what sort of turn-based game you could make in Unity. I imagine you could make whatever you want. I think one of the like Unity tutorials is like a turn-based game where you're going through like a tiled map, um, like trying to get from point A to point B, and there's some like pathfinding enemies or something that come towards you. So I imagine you could probably do something like that. You could do like a tactics game. I think a tactics game would be fun to make. I've never made one of those. I just played a fantastic one that I'm not going to talk about right now, but um, yeah. What's up, Tards Matt? Thank you for stopping by. A couple more minutes. Thank you. I I really like this mug. I got it from a local gallery here in Portland called Fisk. That's like a gallery and design studio. They have this very awesome sort of like iridescent electroplated coffee mug. Not microwave safe because of how they had to get the like kind of iridescent coloring on there. You cannot microwave that mug, but it's good otherwise. Yeah, yeah, it will explode. Or at least it'll make your microwave explode. Hopefully the coffee cup won't explode. Uh, all right, so we're about ready to get started. If you have Unity open, but are unsure how to get to ProBuilder, uh, instructions were just posted in the chat, and I can walk people through that as well. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Wes. I've been coming to PIGSquad stuff for a while. Really love making games, and I love making stuff with ProBuilder. ProBuilder is let me make 3D games really in a really easy way. Like I've used it for several global game jams now. A lot of summer slow jams. I make games on my own, often using ProBuilder as like the foundation of what I'm doing. Um, I don't think of myself as like a 3D modeler, but so this has some of the sort of those. This will create some of those sort of foundational skills for that. I don't think of myself as like a super expert by any means in like doing this sort of stuff, but this is the tool that I use and love for quickly iterating to create like level design and like getting started in like kind of creating 3D spaces. And I think that is really approachable and a really good place to start if you're doing this sort of thing. And I hope that through this workshop today, you can feel comfortable kind of playing around with it and making some spaces of your own and experimenting with 3D level design. So you can see here, I've already got this ProGrids window here, a ProBuilder icon set here, and a ProBuilder window down here. If you're having trouble seeing my mouse, let me know. If you don't see any of these in your Unity project, what you are going to want to do is you're going to go to Window, Package Manager, and search for ProBuilder. And there will be an Install button down here, and you'll click Install. And if you don't see this ProGrids window, you'll have to enable preview packages under Advanced. ProBuilder 4.05 or 4.23. I've got 4.2.3. There haven't been huge changes in ProBuilder over the past while. I imagine 4.0.5 should be fine. If you can get 4.2.3, that's great because that's the version that I'm working on. If not, I think we'll be fine either way. There haven't been huge changes to how it works. It's probably mostly things with stability and things along those lines more so than like big UI changes or anything like that. So 4.0.5 should be fine if that's what you have available to you. Yeah, that should be fine. All right, so once ProBuilder and ProGrids is installed, like I was saying, you need to have preview packages enabled to see the ProGrids. If you're still not seeing these windows, you're going to want to go to Tools, ProGrids, ProGrids window, and that'll open this window over here. I'll close that real quick so you can see. Well, I won't close it all the way. So ProGrids window. If it's minimized, you might see this little tab. And this is in the scene view, not the game view, so make sure you're in your scene tab. Why ProBuilder doesn't show up in Package Manager? That is a good question. Let me walk through how to get this to show up real quick, and then I'll see if we can figure out why ProBuilder doesn't show up in your Package Manager. If you're not seeing this ProBuilder window, you're going to go to Tools, ProBuilder window. I can close this tab. So if you don't have that tab, it won't show anything for ProBuilder. Tools, ProBuilder window. And that'll pop this up as floating. I like to put it down at the bottom. It might show up in this icon mode. You can use icon mode or text mode. Either one will work. I prefer text mode for myself. I haven't used icon mode enough to like get it through my head what all the icons mean. But that is how you get those windows open. You're not seeing ProBuilder in... No, one thing I didn't check is to make sure that ProBuilder works in both the Windows and the Mac version of Unity. So it's possible that if you're on Mac, you might not be seeing ProBuilder, but let me see if I can verify that real quick. Installed fine on Mac. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, ProBuilder is not a preview package. ProBuilder is a full package, or it's not in preview anymore, but ProGrids is in preview. Ryan, are you still having trouble finding ProBuilder in your package manager? Sometimes it takes a while for it to load all the packages that are available. No tools section up at the top. This tools window isn't showing up for you. Let's see, what version of Unity are you working on, Tardsmat? It might be that ProBuilder. If you're working with a really old version, 2019.3. Oh, so that should have. Yeah, so if you don't have ProBuilder and ProGrids installed, this won't show up. So yeah. Thanks, Dylan, for catching that. Ryan, what version of Unity are you on? Yeah, maybe that interrupted the installation or something there. Oh, interesting. That's one of the preview versions that's out right now. I wonder if there's something different in like the preview versions versus of Unity versus the current version in terms of where you find ProBuilder and ProGrids. I've not downloaded those preview versions. Right, yeah, Ryan is living in the future. Is anybody else having trouble currently getting things installed? I mean, that's like half of how I do my learning is just like clicking buttons until I figure out what those buttons are doing. That's basically how I learned ProBuilder, that and just like watching a lot of YouTube. Let's see. Give it a little more time to see if folks are able to get that installed. Got it. Awesome. Tardsmat, are you still having issues with it? They show up as installed, but no tools menu. Yeah, 3.14 Or yeah, I think that's the version that I'm on, Ryan. No, yeah, that should still be good though. I haven't downloaded that version, but that should be totally fine. Yep, Pi version. Still don't have a tools menu. That's interesting. If you go to edit and then preferences, do ProBuilder and ProGrids show up in your preferences? They do not. I wonder if they're not installing properly for some reason. Errors in your console. Running late. Are the steps to open Unity and then open ProBuilder? Yeah, we're just working in a new project. Go ahead and open Unity. I'm on 3.13, but 3.14 should work as well. Just in a brand new project, and then to open ProBuilder, you'll have to install it from the package manager. You can just search for ProBuilder. There should be an install button. And then for ProGrids, you have to have show preview packages on. And you can just search for ProGrids. And there will be an install button. And then once those are installed, you should have a window at the top left of your scene. And there will probably be, there might not be a ProBuilder window immediately, but if there's not, you can go to Tools, ProBuilder window. If it is there, you should have a set of icons down towards the bottom of your scene view. And this might be a floating window that you can move around. I like to dock it at the bottom, and I prefer to keep mine in text mode so I can really quickly see what each thing does. Icon mode might be helpful if you're already familiar with like doing 3D stuff. These icons might be helpful to you. I find that the text mode is easier for me, so that's what I keep it in. While people are getting set up, one thing I wanted to do is just show off a couple things that I've used ProBuilder to make. So I'm just going to open up some stuff in itch real quick. This is something I made for a Summer Slow Jam game in, when was this made? I forget. They say 1 year ago, so I'm going to say last year's Summer Slow Jam, 2018, July 2018. And then, so this is something that I made with Pat Farnark and Sandra Lands in 2018. I built out all of the levels with ProBuilder. So I'll just kind of like really quickly give an idea of this, and then I'll do one more. So everything in this was built with ProBuilder and textured using ProBuilder's UV options. All the furniture, all the rooms. The only thing that you can see right now that wasn't built in ProBuilder is the torch, which is something that somebody else, that Pat grabbed and was able to get put in. But like the chairs, tables, all these like barrels and racks and doors, everything here was built in ProBuilder. I think this is the right. So yeah, so we've got stairs. This is all done in ProBuilder. Yeah. This is one example of something that I've used ProBuilder for. Another example is this game, which we did this year for Global Game Jam. I made that with Max Pepperbrink and Leah Snyderman, both cool PIGSquad folks. So everything except for the nasty little man was made in ProBuilder. The nasty little man was made by Max in Blender, but everything else is ProBuilder. I'm glad you love the nasty little man. But yeah, we can see this was done in 24 hours, so things are a little janky, but you know, we've got some okay looking stuff. We got TV here, some furniture. You know, we've got, you know, a bunch of stuff. Yeah, this was all prototyped really rapidly. So this is a good example of how you can use ProBuilder to really quickly bust out a space and some basic objects just to like get you going on a project. So that's something that I used it for. 48 hours. Sorry, did I say 24? I meant 48 hours. Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time polishing. We also spent a little time afterwards polishing, but most of that was done within the 48 hours of Global Game Jam. Max is a wizard. The last thing I wanted to take a look at with everybody is just this ProBuilder demo reel, so you can get an idea of what other things have been and could be made with ProBuilder, just to kind of like open up your mind as to like what ProBuilder can be used for. And there's music on this, but I don't know if it's copyrighted or not, so I'm not gonna play it just in case that creates a ding for the channel or something. But I did want to show off this demo reel. So there's a tweet from the dev or somebody who worked on this game that said 90% of the geometry in this game, in that Manifold game, was made in ProBuilder. Manifold Garden, right. I almost said Manifold Destiny. That's not it. Definitely not. You can see these are all radically different games that are taking advantage of ProBuilder to create their spaces. Yeah, that Absolute Drift game looks pretty cool. This looks great too. And a lot of these games are probably like the environments were built or prototyped in ProBuilder, and then maybe somebody went in with like exported their geometry from ProBuilder out to Blender, cleaned it up there, and then brought it back in, which is something that you can do. I've seen videos of Superhot's level design, and Superhot, this is all ProBuilder geometry. So like I saw them like adjusting these things using ProBuilder in the Unity scene view. So this is not like exported and brought back in. This is ProBuilder geometry. And you can do stuff like this in ProBuilder if you want. I mean, I can think of how I would make those things. Yeah, those bots were made in ProBuilder. I don't know anything about 3D modeling, so I use ProBuilder 100%. You can export things from, you can export your ProBuilder objects if you want to clean them up in Blender. I don't know anything about that, so I just use it primarily as like a level design tool for like rapidly prototyping spaces. And that's what the focus of this is going to be today is how to get started in it, like from the ground up to like create a space. And then we'll from there, I hope that that gives you some ideas of how to use it in a way that lets you, oh, thank you, Tarts Matt, that lets you like kind of expand out and explore different things that you might want to try doing with ProBuilders. As somebody who didn't come from a 3D background, like ProBuilders really let me use Blender in tandem with this. Would you still create props in Blender and then I actually have done that in games, Ryan. So the question is, if you used Blender in tandem with this, would you still create props in Blender and then place them with ProBuilder? And that's like sort of yes, sort of no. You would probably use you. It would be really helpful to build your spaces in ProBuilder and then bring in objects from Blender to like decorate the space. I've done that in games. You can use ProGrids to kind of like snap those objects to the grid, but ProBuilder itself isn't what you'd be using. We'll kind of go over the difference between ProBuilder and ProGrids as we get into the workshop. Does that answer your question? If not, hopefully we'll kind of cover that a bit more. So that's from 2015. I'm trying to think. I know one game I know was built in ProBuilder, and then it did have a separate 3D environment workflow as well, was Tacoma. If I'm remembering correctly, they built that and gray blocked it all out in ProBuilder. I'll kind of talk about what gray blocking is. They built that out in ProBuilder, exported their geometry to create like their good 3D spaces, and then brought it back. But some things like floors and ceilings are sometimes still ProBuilder geometry in Tacoma, if I'm remembering correctly, which I might not be. Can you use this to make VR experiences? As far as I know, yes. ProBuilder is great for building out spaces. You need low poly objects in VR. I haven't worked with VR, so I don't know from a technical point of view how ProBuilder's meshes play with VR, but I have to assume that there are people who are making VR experiences using ProBuilder. Oh yeah, I guess that's true. Superhot is a VR or is a great VR game now, and that was all built in ProBuilder as far as the geometry goes. But that's a pretty low poly game, so. All right, so hopefully everybody is sort of set up now. We'll start going through like the workshop itself. Again, if you're just getting here, my name's Wes. Good to meet you. I hope that I can teach you something interesting about using ProBuilder and that it helps you expand what you're able to do in Unity and kind of build out into in the future. So the first thing that I'd like to go over is navigating the scene in 3D space. If you're not familiar with navigating the scene in Unity, it's really helpful to have a mouse and keyboard for this. You can move your view around by holding right click and scrolling left and right. And you can navigate the space by holding right click and then using WASD, just like you would in like a first person game to like move around. That'll move you around in the space. And so you can, kind of strafe around, moving left and right, forward and back. And then you can also use Q to move down and E to move up. So being able to kind of move around in your 3D scene view is really, really important when you're building out 3D spaces using ProBuilders. Being able to quickly like move around and get to a piece of geometry that you need to see, really, really important. So it might be worth just taking a moment to kind of play around with that 3D movement and get a feel for how moving around works. You can do this if you have a trackpad. It's just really not as easy. I'm going to create a link to my outline and just post that in the chat real quick. So if anybody wants to take a look at this, they can. Oh, I am not logged in that chat. I'm going to send this link via my phone real quick. About the summer slow jams, is there any sort of barrier of entry in terms of skill level? I would say absolutely no. I came into PIGSquad knowing nothing about how to make games, and by doing these jams over and over is how I got to the point where I am now. Like literally all of my, almost, I would say like 80% of what I know about making games, I know because I just jumped into game jams knowing very little to nothing and just started kind of like exploring and working with people. So I would say having not like any special skills is fantastic. Let me send this document, this outline that I'm working off of to everybody real quick, and then we will continue on. This will just take me a second. Right. Hopefully that worked. And this is the outline I'm working off of for the whole thing. So if you need to refer back to this at any point, feel free to. I hope it is helpful for folks. All right. So yeah, moving around in 3D space is like the first skill that you'll need to kind of get when you're looking at getting started with things like ProBuilder. Next, we're going to create our first shape. So down here in the ProBuilder window, you have a bunch of different options. If you click this new shape button, and if you're in icon mode, it'll just look like a couple pieces of geometry. Are you talking about the gizmo here or the set of tools over here on the left-hand side? Question is, I have ProBuilder imported, but don't see the set of UI you have in the upper right of the scene view. This up here is ProGrids. If you don't have this, that's in Package Manager. Yeah, if it's not installed yet, you'll have to go to the Package Manager, enable Preview Packages, and search for ProGrids. All right, so I'm going to go back to the text mode because that's what I'm super familiar with. So this new shape button will pop in one cube. And whenever I'm getting started, I always reset the transform on these just so they're at 0 when I am making my space. Sky in your scene is gray, which makes it hard to see. How do I change that? Oh, interesting. So in lighting, there's this option for a Skybox, and that's where you can set your Skybox. If it's just gray, I'm sorry, I don't know what would cause that. Maybe somebody in the chat would be helpful in terms of knowing what might cause that. To dock the ProBuilder window, if it's just floating, you click the tab and drag it, and it should snap. And then you can resize it. So we've got a cube here. Enable preview packages. If you're in Package Manager, there will be an advanced menu, and you can hit Show Preview Packages. So Once I've got my cube, I will reset the transform, and you can do that by coming up here to this kind of kebab menu and then hitting reset. That'll put it at 0, 0, 0. You can also right click here and click reset. The new shape button is going to be on this ProBuilder window. It might be floating and it might be docked somewhere. If you're seeing icons instead of text, you can change that here using this kebab menu. I keep it in text, but it might be in icon mode, in which case it'll be this far left button. So once your object is, you've got your cube there, you can hit F when you're hovering over the scene view to like zoom in on whatever object you currently have selected. Some things to do in your scene that I would recommend before we actually get much further is there's an option for lighting. This uses, if it's highlighted, that's using your scene lighting. So you can see if I adjust this, that's adjusting the lighting here. This can make it really hard to do, to like work with the 3D space, because you'll have all these shadows everywhere that are like interrupting your sense of space. So I would turn that off. And then I would also make sure that this is global instead of local. So right here, it's local. Now it's global. And the reason is that that will affect things like how your how things show up when you're like grabbing pieces of geometry. So having it on global is really helpful. And we'll go over all of this stuff, or is definitely all of this stuff and a few things on the ProBuilder menu as we go. Those are just some things that you might want to do to get your space set up so that it is more manageable later on. So we've got our cube here. We have it selected. We can zoom in on it by tapping the F key when we're hovering over our scene view. You can see if we're like way over here and we select our cube, F brings us straight to it. We can move around our cube using that WASD and holding right click that we talked about a moment ago. And so the ProBuilder has 4 different, you don't see 3 axes. If your cube is selected, you should see these. If it's not selected, you won't see any axes on it. Yeah, it could also be, so there's a few different ways to interact with your object. Move tool is the tool that lets you move your object, and that's what shows these axes. So yeah, if you hit W, as Dylan mentioned in the chat, you should get those. The first thing we're going to talk about with ProBuilder is this set of tools down here at the bottom of your scene view. You have 4 different ways of selecting and interacting with your object using these tools. This first one on the left is object selection. This lets you move your whole object at once, as you can see here. The next one is your vertex selection. This lets you select one or multiple by holding Control or Shift vertices that will let you move those vertices. The next one is your edge selection tool. That will let you select any of these edges or multiple, and then you can move those with your transform tool. And then the last one is your face selection. So this will select entire faces or kind of plane surfaces of your object. And then you can move those out. So if you wanted to move this up, you can move it up. And you can see just right away, just with these tools, you start to get an idea of kind of like how ProBuilder lets you interact with these objects. So there's some important keyboard shortcuts to know. One, you can select multiple things, multiple pieces of geometry using Control or Shift. I am recording this. It should be available later, like yesterday's workshop. Sorry, the question was if it would be recorded and available. You can hit Control or Shift to select multiple faces or multiple edges or multiple vertices. So that's an important keyboard shortcut to know. I'm going to delete this and grab a new cube now that I've mangled that one beyond recognition. And then some other important ones, as we were just mentioning, the W, E, and R keys will move between different ways of interacting with your object. So W is, I think they call it translation. I just think of it as like moving. So that's W. E is your rotation. Can you make a D8? I do not know what a D8 is, unfortunately. So E is your rotation. You can rotate it on your axes. 8-sided die. Yeah, I think that would actually not be too bad to make if that's something that you want to make. R is going to be your scaling. That lets you scale your object. Just right up front, I'm going to say I try not to scale as much as possible. WER are the standard Unity keys, yes. I would not scale entire objects when using ProBuilder, and I'll kind of talk about why when we're talking about UVs and textures. But any of these three standard ways of interacting with your object, you can also use these to interact with your individual pieces of geometry. So like for vertices, you can't really rotate those. Like that's not going to do really anything for you. Scaling a vertex isn't really going to do anything for you. Scaling an edge doesn't really, it only does something if it's along the same plane as the edge. You can see there that'll do something, but scaling that edge in a direction that isn't parallel with that edge doesn't do anything. And then faces take advantage of everything. So you can scale a face, you can move a face, and you can rotate a face. So I'm going to create a new object here real quick and just kind of go over that one more time. So if you've got your whole object selected, that'll give you all your standard Unity tools. If you've got a vertex, you can move a vertex, but you can't scale or rotate a vertex. So shortcut keys for ProBuilder selectors: object, edge, vertex, face. There are. The problem is that they intersect with some of Unity's built-in keyboard shortcuts. There's one keyboard shortcut that I'm going to go over now that I find really helpful because I tend to switch between object and one specific type of selection. So if you have the object selection and then a face selection that you want to bounce back and forth between, you can tap G, and that will go between your face selection or edge selection and vertex selection and object selection, whichever one you had selected last. So if I had edge selected, it'll bounce, you can see, between edge and object. Vertex, it'll bounce between vertex and object. That's the G key. So then again, with edges, you can move and rotate edges along a parallel plane. You can move edges in whatever direction you want, and you can scale edges along kind of a parallel plane to the edge. And then faces, you can scale, you can rotate, and you can move. Does anybody have any questions about how this works down here, the sort of geometry selections? All right. So what I'd like to have folks do is just take a moment and can you add math to add more sides, or is it always eyeballed? Do you mean like in terms of creating uh, creating like objects that are more than four side or more than like a cube? A cheat sheet for the shortcuts. I can find a so there some of these shortcuts are in the outline that I posted in the chat. Um, if you want to see all of the shortcuts, uh, you can go to. I don't have a cheat sheet available, but you can find them in the documentation for ProGrids and ProBuilder, and there are some good cheat sheets out there. Oh, thanks for posting that, Dylan. Like type like 4 and get it scaled up by 4 units. So uh, that'll interact, Caleb, with ProGrids, which I'll be going over here in just a moment. It is eyeballing it. I don't believe there's a way to use math to scale individual faces or edges. If there is, somebody please let me know. But as far as I know, there's not a way to do that. But ProGrids can make it easier to eyeball because of how it snaps. To make stairs, do you need to snap multiple shapes together, or were you able to mold it in a way that allowed it to look like stairs? We'll go over some more advanced shapes here in a bit, but there's actually a button you can click when you're creating a new shape to just create a set of stairs. But we'll go over more advanced shapes in a minute. You could edit the transforms of the entire object, but I don't know about specific edges or faces. Yeah, you can put math in these fields over here to adjust things, but for individual faces or edges, I don't know if you can. Thanks, Boom Bottle. H cycles through vertex, edge, and face. Yeah, H does do that. The problem is that there's also Unity built-in shortcuts that use H. So if you need to use that shortcut, it'll interact weirdly with the ProBuilder shortcut. You can override and choose which one you want to be the active shortcut for H. So if you know you're using ProBuilder a lot and you're not going to be using the other option that H is mapped to, go ahead and override it. I tend to use like one or two things a lot, so I'll just use G to toggle between those two. But H is useful if you know you're not going to take advantage of that shortcut for its built-in purpose. So right now what I'd like to have folks do is just kind of like grab a cube, create a cube using this new shape button, and play around with these vertex, edge selection, and face selection tools, and just kind of like mess around with that for about 5 minutes and get a feeling of how moving between those and like how interacting with those using Unity's tools work. And I can answer any questions you have that pop up as you're kind of like playing around with your cube that you're going to mangle as much as possible. And I'm just going to set a quick 5-minute timer just to keep on track of that. I would if I could find my clock, my timer. Yeah, and there might be other ways to do that might be more simple once we get into some more advanced shapes. Like you could spawn. How do you make basically a donut shape? That I did some extruding on, and we'll talk about extruding in a minute here. There's once you get the basics of how these work, there's some like more advanced methods that you can take to sort of like build things out. Torus is a donut shape, but I think what Wheel Rainstorm is talking about is I had this object that was kind of like a TV stand that was like, it was built out of a cube that was kind of wrapped around in a square shape. A torus is more, as far as ProBuilder is concerned, there is a torus shape that you can build, but it's more of a donut. And I can kind of show what that is. And we'll go over some of the big shapes once we get further into that. Is anybody playing around with a cube and running into anything that is confusing? Donuts would be great. I would love a donut. Cubes at the bottom end instead of arrows. If you see cubes, you're probably in the scaling. Is this what it looks like right here, Liz? Only get cube meal. If you're in the scale mode, you can tap W to switch back to your move mode, or you can click the move tool up here. I would get used to using WER to switch between those, because the less you move your mouse up to the top, the faster you'll work in the scene view. So if you see cubes, that's scale. If you see arrows, that's move. And if you see circles, that's rotate. Give it a couple more minutes for people to play around with their cubes. Yeah, I don't know why my pivot point got put where it is on this particular object. There is an option to center your pivot on your object in ProBuilder. As you like move your object around and start playing with its shape, the pivot ends up in weird spots. So it can be helpful to kind of like center your pivot somewhere else. And you could also, select the vertices, and then I think you can select the vertices and set your pivot there. Maybe not. I can't remember exactly how to do that. There's a way to change where your pivot is more manually, but I always end up just centering it and dealing with it that way. So it's not a problem if your pivot's not in a corner. The pivot point also translates to the position of the transform. I think that's correct. I think that this point is the same as this point. And this gets messed with as you start to move your object around. You can like end up with your pivot point in weird spots. And I unfortunately don't know super well how to manually choose where you want that pivot to be in your object overall. Because now it's over there. I know how to center the pivot. That basically is where my knowledge on that ends, unfortunately. And if anybody knows how to manually set a pivot point, please throw that in the chat, because that would be great for folks to know. Usually having it centered is good enough. All right, we're going to move on. The next thing we're going to talk about is snapping with ProGrids. This is ProGrids is the piece that helps you keep things from getting like just barely off from each other. ProGrids holds everything together in a real tight way. And that's this window that's up here at the upper left. I'm going to go over some of the things in the top left here in this ProGrids window. This top one is your snapping increment. You can use the minus and equals key to change that. Minus will go down, equals will go up. You can think of the equals key as the plus key. This is how many units you're snapping to. So 1 is 1 meter. Half is half a meter. Ah, that makes sense. I thought I remembered there being an option. Dylan says you can select a vertex and use set pivot to change the pivot to a specific spot. So that's going to be here in your vertex options, set pivot, and now that's my pivot for the entire shape. I'm going to create a new cube because I think I might have scaled this. Yeah. So this is your increments. I tend to keep this between 0.5 and 1 is what I normally keep it at. I usually will only go smaller than that if I'm like making something that is like a small detail on another object. I usually won't change it lower than 2.5 when I'm creating a space, or 0.25 rather, when I'm creating a space. The set pivot should only work with vertices. Sorry, the question is, does it only work with vertices? Set pivot, I believe, is a vertex specific option, not an edge or a face option. The next option here in ProGrids after your snap increment is an option to draw your grid. So you can see now I've got this grid that's showing up. And turn that on and off. Rendering sort of weird for me right now. So you can see on, off. Sorry, there it is, on and off. That's these grids that are happening back here. This next option is to turn snapping on and off. So if snapping is on, as it is right now, it will snap your object to 1 meter units or whatever increment unit you have up here. If you have ProGrid snapping off, it'll let you smoothly place your thing, but then you can get into like really weird, like stuff is not like quite lining up to each other sort of situations, which is great sometimes. Sometimes you want that more organic feeling. But if you're like building a room, you're putting like walls and whatnot together, you want to have that a little more regimented. We'll turn that back on. And you can see now this isn't really lining up with the grid behind it. This next button is Snap Selected Objects to Grid. I can press that and it will immediately align my object with the grid behind it. Right-click to use the ProGrids buttons. Right-click or left-click should work. This is me left-clicking. This is me right-clicking. Left-clicking, right-clicking. Either should work. So yeah, if this will snap it to whatever increment you have it set to. So if I set this to 4, you can see it's not anywhere near that 4. So hitting that snap button will automatically push that to 4. Left does not work for me for some reason. Huh, interesting. I wonder if there is a setting that you can change for that. You can see now it's snapping to 4 meter increments instead of 1 meter increments. I'm going to center the pivot on this object so that more clearly visible. So back to 1. This next option is a lock for your grid. So if you lock your grid and you move your object, the grid will stay in the same place. But if you, something is not working right there. Oh, you know what it is. So if I have, you can see this grid is moving with the object currently, because this is unlocked. If you lock the perspective, the grid stays in the same spot, even when you move your object. And then these four buttons here are choosing which grids you're rendering if you have your draw on. So this is your X grid, your Y grid, and your Z grid. Or you can choose to have all three rendered. I tend not to keep these grids on. I tend to just leave them off. I don't know why. It's just like that works better for me and how I'm visualizing things. But if it's helpful for you, absolutely take advantage of the tool that's there. Does anybody have any questions about these options that are here on the ProGrids window? I'm not seeing any questions now. Again, there's some angle. Oh, yeah, that's true. So you can have it, you can set an angle, and that's useful for when you're in 2D mode. You can set, you can draw with angled line guides. So this angle here is the degree that you set in your increments menu. If you click on the increments button, is there rotation snapping? So the rotation snapping is just Unity's rotation snapping. So if you hold Control when you're rotating on an axis, it'll give you snapping to specific increments. I think that's like 15 degrees or something. Let me go back to 3D mode. And that only works on these blue, red, and green axes. If you grab this yellow one, there's no snapping on that one. This white one that's out here. It's just the blue, red, and green that allow you to snap. Any other questions about the ProGrids window over here? Oh yeah, that makes sense. It's Control on PC, and the Apple key lets you do the rotational snapping on Mac. So Control or Apple, and then click and drag to do snapping rotation. And then again, minus and equals adjust the size of your grid or the snapping increment. One other thing that's useful to know if you do use these grid lines is that you can change where those lines are using the square bracket keys. Left and right square bracket will let you nudge your grid. So say you've got your Y grid and you want that at the top of your object, you can use the right square bracket to bring that up, left square bracket to bring it down. Yeah, I recommend using as many keyboard shortcuts as possible when you're doing this. If you can take your right hand off the mouse as little as possible, that will really speed up your workflow when working with ProBuilder and ProGrids. Sometimes you gotta click things, but as much as possible, I like to not. All right. The next thing I'm going to talk about is just a organizational thing. When you're using ProBuilder, you're duplicating objects a lot, and you end up with a hierarchy, this hierarchy window. You end up with like 900 cubes, and like it becomes quickly incredibly unmanageable. I recommend getting in the habit of creating empty objects. And I know that this was also talked about in the Unity workshop yesterday, which you should definitely go check out the playback of. Create an empty game object, reset its transform to 0, and use these empty game objects like folders. Like I'm going to call this one room. And then I'm going to create another empty game object, reset its transform, put it in the room, and then set that to be like walls and floors. And then I'm going to decide that this cube is going to be a floor. I'm going to throw that in my walls and floors game object. And then now when I start like moving this around and building out my space, it's going to stay a little more organized, and I'm going to have an idea of what I'm doing later when I'm looking at my hierarchy. Control D duplicates your object, so you can see that just created a new object. That's Control D for PC. I imagine it is going to be, if somebody's on Mac, can you check if it's Command or Apple D to duplicate an object on Mac? And if anybody knows offhand, could you throw that in the chat? Command D. Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. So now I've got a second object that is going to be walls. You can see it's snapping together using ProGrids. I'm going to rename this wall. All right. Yeah, sorry. So I will back up a little bit. So this floor object here, what I did is very straight. It is just a new cube that I grabbed a face of, and I brought the face out like 10, brought this face out like 10, and all of a sudden I've got a nice big flat floor that I can use for things. Oh yeah, so that looks so straight. I remember having a pain and trying to eyeball it when changing the transform to get it perfectly aligned. Yeah, that is the magic of ProBuilders. Like, look at how well this is snapped together. You know, there is no light between those two objects. So to get from this floor to the wall, I just grabbed my floor object. Oh, make sure you're grabbing the whole object and not just the face. And I rotated it up, and then I adjusted it to be kind of like wall height. Something that could be helpful if you're trying to get an idea of proportions is just create a capsule object. You go to your hierarchy, right click, 3D object, capsule, and use this as like a reference for like sort of how tall a person might be. A good standard room size is kind of like, I'd say like 4 units. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to move this down and just grab the bottom of this face real quick so that this is nice and even. 4 units, I would say, is like a good standard wall space or wall height. Things are always going to be like, the two things that is really easy to do when building spaces and getting an idea of doing level design is everything is either going to be a cavern or it's going to be way too small. So just kind of get in the habit of creating things that you can use as sort of like kind of a reference point. So a Capsule Collider, a Capsule Object can be a really good reference point for a person. And that looks like that wall's going to be big, but if you had like a camera on here, it would not feel as big as it looks. So yeah, so now if I wanted to like build this out into a room, I could duplicate that wall, drag that over, duplicate it again, rotate it, move that a little bit, adjust these faces. And because I've got it in this game object, instead of having, you know, cube 1, cube 2, cube 3, I have an idea of what these objects are. So does anybody have any questions about that? Kind of keeping things organized in the hierarchy? Oh, thanks, Dylan. Yeah. So if you're trying to keep things organized in the hierarchy, cubes are just duplicating instead of stretching. Let's see. So if you've got an object selected, what you want to do is if you want, let's grab a new cube, and we'll just cover this real quick. So you've got a cube, and you want to turn it into like something the size of a floor. You'll go to your face selection tool, and you'll click one side of your cube, and you should have that face should then highlight. Once that's highlighted, you can use the move tool to bring that out to however big you want your floor or your whatever you're creating. Then you can grab an opposing side and bring that out. And as you do that, if you're using the move tool, what you'll see is it will create more little cubes. That's just a texture on the object. That's not individual objects. You can see it's still one big face. If you use the scale tool, what'll happen is it will scale the whole thing, and it'll throw off the scale of like your meters as well. So that's why you want to use, you want to bring out the faces instead of scaling. Yeah, Dylan makes a good point. After you finish using your face selection to make your floor however big you want, make sure that you go back to object selection mode when you want to move your whole object or rotate your whole object. If you have your floor set up and you want to rotate, you've like been making your floor, and now you want a wall, and you start rotating the faces, you'll start getting some real goofy looking stuff, which can be very cool and useful. But if you're trying to make a flat floor, you want to make sure you're rotating the whole object and not just a face. Any other questions? All right. What I'd like to have folks do now is just take like 10 minutes to start from a new cube and create a room of whatever size you want. Give it 4 walls and a floor. Make it more complex if you want. Like I'll spend some time just like kind of quickly prototyping a little room, but just kind of like mess around, use ProGrids and ProBuilder to kind of bring those faces out, build some walls, build some floors, start to get an idea of a space. How do I change a pivot point? So if you have the whole object selected and you want your pivot centered, you can hit center pivot. If you want to change it to a specific vertex, you can click that vertex. And in your red set of objects, you will find set pivot, and you can set the pivot there. Ryan asked, can I punch a hole in something like to make a window, for example? I'll go over sort of that. There is an option to punch a hole in something, but that's an experimental option right now. It's not like a full release option, and it doesn't always work. I'll talk about how you can kind of achieve the same effect using like what we call extruding, or like putting a bunch of objects together to kind of create the illusion of a wall with a window. So yeah, just spend like 5 to 10 minutes here, just kind of creating a room, and see what issues you run into as you do that, what questions pop up, and we'll kind of address those as they come up. And I'll just start kind of making a space here real quick so that people can see kind of how that works. You can see ProGrids just makes this so easy to snap things together. It's really like magical. Sometimes you might want to, instead of creating a really long wall, duplicate a wall so that it's multiple points. That's partly a matter of preference, but it can be helpful sometimes when you're doing like texturing later on. We ran into an issue with Nasty Little Man where we were using this shader that kind of created sort of like a PlayStation 1 sort of effect. It like emulated the way that a PlayStation 1 sort of messes with things around the edges. And if we had a huge texture, if it like stretched across a long way, it created this wild warping sort of look. But if we had the faces subdivided, it could kind of handle that a little better and was a little less nauseating. So sometimes having like multiple walls like this can be helpful compared to having like just one really long wall. But if you know that it's going to be fine for what you're doing, or if you're just rapidly prototyping a space, do whatever is fastest in the moment. Whatever gets you to play testing fastest is, I find, the best thing when you're like trying to get the idea of what a space is supposed to feel like. I'll just keep building this out a little bit and see if we get any questions here. Two objects overlapping. Is there a way to select the face of one of the objects over another? Oh, so like, let's say right here we've got these two objects that are kind of lining up. And I want to select the face that is behind this front wall. If I click once and then click a second time, it'll select the face that is under my current face. So you can see kind of with that edge highlighting. Another thing you can do is you can fly into your object and click the face that way. And that will let you get it. But doing that double click is a little easier than flying into your object to get a peek at that underlying face. You can see even with how far out I am, because I know that ProGrids is snapping things together, I don't have to be super worried about whether things are getting lined up. Can you select the back of a face somehow? As far as I know, you can't. Because there isn't anything on the back of a face. This gets into like more about how 3D modeling and 3D objects are rendered than I personally know about, but there's something called a normal, and the back of your face doesn't have a normal on it, and it's not rendered. So you can change where on your object the normals are. Like there is an option to like flip a normal, so you can make this isn't something I have covered, so I'll just show it off real quick. But if you had if you wanted to make the inside of this cube a room, you could take this cube and flip normals, And then your normals are on the inside of your cube instead of the outside. So you can see when I'm in it, I can kind of look around. But when I'm outside of it, I can see through these because there's nothing on the back of these faces. So if you're creating just need to really quickly create a really big square room, you can do that. But how normals work exactly is a little beyond my knowledge, and gets more into like the 3D side of things that I'm not as knowledgeable about. I would love to see a 3D workshop. If anybody ever wants to teach me Blender and like the basics of 3D modeling, I would be so happy to learn those things. I'm going to move this way just so that these line up. You can see that these overlap, so I'm doing just what I talked about here a second ago, clicking a few times to get the face that I want, and then moving that. I don't know, so I've got a nice little room there. How are folks feeling about the rooms that they're creating? Is anybody running into anything that is surprising or giving them trouble or confusing in any way that they'd like me to go over? Not seeing any questions yet. I'll give a couple more minutes, just kind of play around with that and get a sense of how snapping together a room feels, and then we'll move on to some more complex shapes. Should my walls and floor be snapping together? If ProGrids is on, they should snap. They won't snap to each other. They'll snap to your grid. So they're not like magnetic to each other, but you can see for me, I've got this grid on, and the objects are snapping to increments on that grid, and that's using the ProGrid snapping increment up here. So that's how I'm making sure that things are snapping together, is just by making sure that ProGrids is on, that this button here is on, and sorry, one second. And that your snapping increment is set to something like 0.5 or 1. If you start getting too small, like this, you can see it barely is snapping to anything at that point, at 0.0625. So keep it at like 0.5 or 1. You can see the grid changing as I move that. And if things aren't snapped to your grid, you can use this option here to snap them, and that'll put them back on whatever grid increment you have at the moment. Does that answer the question for you, Liz? Does that help? And Caleb, I made stairs, and how do I increase the number of steps? We can go, I will be going over that, so we'll definitely talk about stairs. The last thing again, so snapping to grid, if your object is not snapped to your grid and it's just kind of like sitting here loose off of your grid, you can select your object and hit this push to grid button. It's the arrow pointing towards a grid, and that will push it onto whatever grid increment you currently have, which should help you get things snapped back in. Is there a way I can segment my initial floor to subdivide a face and pull a segment out? There definitely is, and I will be going over that in just a minute. All right. How worried should I be about overlapping objects? Right now, I wouldn't be worried about it. What you can run into with that is something called Z fighting. So if I have this face here and I pull that through here, something that can happen is that, let me see if, I'm going to try and get this to not line up as well so that you can see this. It's hard to see with the ProBuilder mesh because they line up so well, but what you'll run into is that this will like flash between the textures on the two different objects. So and we call that Z fighting. So that's like the objects, the renderer struggling to figure out which object it should be rendering on top of the other. I'd say it's good to avoid overlapping objects as much as possible, because you want to keep that sort of like Z fighting to a minimum, and it can be a pain later if you don't take care of it now. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and move on to creating, where was the push to grid? Push to grid is this button here that looks like an arrow pointing to a grid. That'll snap objects to whatever increment you currently have set. So like if you have a 4 increment and it's not on your 4, you can hit push to grid and it'll snap it to that 4 meter grid. So, but it'll snap it to whatever increment is currently set. All right, we're going to make some more complex shapes now. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is extruding. This is like the #1 way that I mess around with like creating some fun shapes. So I'm just going to grab a cube here. Oh, where'd it go? I've got my cube, and let's say I want to have multiple faces on it. What I'll do is I'll grab a face, I'll hold the shift key on my keyboard, and then I'll drag that transform out. And you can see for me, I've got an option on that shows what action I'm taking. You might not see that, but it's extruding, and now you can see that this has multiple faces rather than just bringing the transform out, which extends the face. So that's extruding, and that's I use extruding constantly. That is one of the things that I use almost more than anything. So you can extrude any faces out, so you can start to really rapidly create some more complex, interesting shapes just by playing around with extruding. And you can extrude multiple faces at once if you want. You could extrude in weird directions. Ah, you did this on accident earlier, Ryan? That's funny. Yeah, this is a very important skill. And so like you can see this is creating all these faces anytime I use this extrude, and any of these faces can then be extruded. So you can start to get like real wild with the shapes that you're creating, you know, like. So what you're going to do, where is the extrude tool again? So you're going to select a face. You're going to hold the shift key on your keyboard, and then you're going to move the face in the same way that you would if you were just extending that face. Shift just is what does the extrude. So holding shift while moving it rather than just moving it. You can see the difference here being extrude creates new faces, and not extruding just extends the face. So you can see just really quickly how quickly I was able to create this very bizarre shape just by like extruding random faces out and then moving those faces around. You can create some real fun stuff that way. Another thing you can do is you can inset faces using a similar method, but using the scaling tool. So if you have one face selected and you have the scale tool, that's R on your keyboard, you can hold Shift and then scale down to create an inset face. You can see that instead of extruding out, I scaled it down. So that creates these faces out here and then a face in there that you can then move around independent of each other. Or you can start extruding just that face out. So by mixing these tools, you can start to see how you can get even funkier shapes. And you can bring things back in. So, maybe this is like a cannon or something. I don't know. Gem switch with a pompadour. Oh my God, it sort of is. So, yeah, this is, let's see, we'll extrude that down, bring that out, extrude it down again, extrude that out, and create some fun shapes that way. The inset doesn't seem to be snap to grid. Yeah, it is not. You can hold Control to snap it to Unity's grid, but it does not snap to the ProBuilder grid. And I don't know why that is. I don't think that there's any options that I can toggle to do that. It isn't that is one of the things that you just sort of have to eyeball, unfortunately. You can move that face of the grid, but then you start getting weird stuff where it's like trying to snap that particular face to a grid. Ryan, your inset seems snap to a grid. Interesting. Let me just take a quick peek at the preferences to see if there's an option for that in ProGrids. So I don't believe there may be a way to get it to snap. I haven't seen it. This inset sort of extrusion. It'd be very nice to get it to snap to the grid, but I have not figured out a way to do that yet. So does anybody have any questions about extruding or insetting currently? All right, the next thing we're going to look at is the more advanced new shape options. So you can see here there's a plus on new shape. There is a keyboard shortcut. I forgot to put this in the outline. For new shape, Control K will give you a cube. They're a hotkey to like free excuse and ignore your current snap settings. You can turn off ProGrids while you're extruding if you want to free extrude. And then turn it back on when you are back to feeling like you want things to snap again. So Control K will give you a cube. Control Shift K will bring up the advanced new shape menu, which you can also get by clicking this plus. And this will give you a shape tool that gives you a bunch of different options. I'm just going to go over a couple of the ones that I use the most often, but feel free to explore this. I definitely recommend exploring this. So cube is the basic one. If you know you need your cube to be a certain size when you're starting, you can bring up this menu and say like, I want this to be 10 by 1 by 10. and then build your shape to just be that starting out. You can also, so there's a bunch of different options. The ones that I use most often are cube, stairs. Stairs is fantastic. You can set how many steps you want on your stairs using this slider or by punching in the number. Build sides is telling it whether or not you want sides on your stairs or if you just want the tops and fronts. So you can see if I uncheck build sides, I now just have these faces. Curvature sets the angle that your stairs are being built at. You can set your stairs curvature to 0 if you want no angle to those. If you do have an angle, you can switch which way it's rotating by hitting this mirror button. And then you have the width of your stairs, the height of your stairs, and the depth of your stairs. And this is a place where having a point of reference is incredibly helpful. Stairs can look real weird if you get the proportions of them wrong. So I recommend if you're building some stairs, put them next to something that's going to give you some sort of point of reference so that you can be like, oh, wow, yeah, these stairs are way too deep. Maybe I need more. Let's see. Let's get that to the size of my wall. Well, I know my wall's 4 meters. Let's say the width should be like 2 meters. And man, those stairs look so deep. Maybe I need more steps so that they look more realistic. Let's throw 22 steps there. So having that point of reference is just like critical. So that you hit build and then it becomes an object in your space. You can see stairs are built up of lots of little bits of geometry. You could go hog wild with messing with those. And then on any of these objects, just like with the cube, you can start grabbing faces and like extruding stuff out if you want to. How did you get to the shape tool again? You can hit this plus button if you're in text view. That'll bring up this shape tool. Or you can hit Control-Shift-K. It might be Command-Shift-K if you're on a Mac. And if you are in icon mode, you're going to hold Alt and click your new shape tool, and that'll bring up the window. Another shape that I use a ton is, that does not come up. Are you using the icon mode or the text mode for this down here? Text mode. So when you are hovered over the plus, the outline should darken a bit. See stuff in the inspector, but not the tool. Oh, so it's like showing up in the hierarchy, but this tool isn't showing up? Oh, strange. I don't know what would cause that. That's interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure what would cause that. I would look at the tabs along your different windows and see if it's like maybe popped in docked somewhere. Am I seeing a difference between gray and blue objects where the blue objects don't let you grab the faces and vertices? Yeah, so the blue object is a shape it's a preview of the shape that you're building, and the geometry of the object can't be affected until it's built. When you hit build, it'll turn gray, and then you'll be able to select the faces and vertices. While it's in the build mode, which is what this arch shape is currently in, you can only affect the geometry by setting the settings here. and not in the scene. So arch is something that I use a lot because it's great for giving like a bit of character to like a doorway, which we're going to go over in a second. So like you might set it to like, I don't know, 1.5 thickness of whatever your walls are. For me, my walls are 0.5, depth 0.5. So thickness is the radius this way, like how thick that is. And then I think 0.5 looks good for that. Depth is how deep it is. I'm setting that to 0.5 because I've got my walls at 0.5 depth. Number of sides is, you can see here how many faces there are. If I drop this to like 6, you get kind of this like lower poly look to it. You can see now it's only got 6 faces. 6 or 8 faces is honestly enough a lot, and we'll go over, there's something called smoothing that we'll go over here in a minute. But you can get this looking smoother than like 6 individual faces, 8 individual faces. But the higher you go with this, you know, the more faces you have, the more vertices, the more polys you have. But also like the smoother it looks. You can still see that that's individual faces, but it's harder to tell. But I'm going to go with 8 faces on this. And then arch degrees is how much of that arch you want to build. I'm going 180 because I want to use this for a doorway eventually. And then end caps is whether it's putting a face here. So you can see with end caps, you get a face on the bottom. Without end caps, you don't. So I'm going to go ahead and build that. The arch is something that I use a ton. Pipe is really useful if you want to like, this is just like a cylinder with a hole punched out of it. You know, you could use that as like something that you're walking through. Let's say you're making like a sewer level or something and you want a bunch of like pipes to go through. You could build out a pipe, grab some faces. There's this thing called select face loop. Face ring that you can use to grab all those, and then you could like make like a pipe that you want to go through. Pipes are cool. I like pipes. I use those. And then there's a bunch of different things in here that I recommend playing around with. Prism is like a triangle thing. Cylinder is what it sounds like. It's just a cylinder. Very useful for making like furniture and stuff. There's cones, planes. I never use this door. I don't know why. I like setting up my door myself. Do I feel like we'll be going past 4? Probably just a little past 4. We're almost through the complex shape spot, and then we'll be doing a little bit of practice, and then we're almost done. Yeah, it's a very square door. I like to kind of set up my door myself. Yeah, we'll probably go just a little bit past 4, and then I'll hang around for a while for folks to ask questions. Yeah, the torus shape is like, right now my torus shape is set up in a funny way, but if I turn on the vertical and horizontal circumference, there's your donut. That's a very good donut shape, but you can kind of mess around with things and like play around with them. I haven't used this torus shape a lot, but I'm sure you could find a good use for it. Sphere. Oh, there we go. You know, you can change the radius, change the subdivisions, so you can get a pretty pointy looking sphere if you want. So that is that tool. And we'll play around with that a little bit more in a minute here. The next tool, I'm going to go over these next two tools pretty quickly. I don't use them a lot, but they can be really helpful if you need to just like quickly get a shape. All right, when making a new shape, do you just move it away from the room to see it, or something like to toggle the room on and off? Yeah, I just always move it away. If you have your rooms nested in these objects, you can use that kind of like folder structure to turn your room on and off. But I just tend to move it out of the way, or like move it into a spot that's going to give me a point of reference for what it needs to look like. All right. The next tool I'm going to show off is this new Pali shape tool. This tool is kind of cool because you can just kind of use points. Like, I'm just going to like plot out a bunch of points here. And once I connect them, I can move my mouse up and down to create the dimension to it. And then suddenly I've got a shape in the shape of the points that I laid down. So again, that's this new Pali tool. Just laying out some points, moving my mouse, and suddenly I've got a new shape. So that can be cool to like really quickly get the rough outline of a more complex shape if you need one, so that you don't have to do as much like extruding and moving things around. That could be helpful that way. I forgot about this cube floating around up here. There's also this new Bezier shape tool. So that automatically gives you 2 points. This one, it could be helpful to change your perspective to the isometric map and like see where things are on the grid. But you can move these points. You can set up new points along the path that you can then move. I almost never use this tool, but it's a very cool tool if you need to create like a weird spaghetti shape very quickly. And you can move these handles to adjust kind of the angle on those. And that's basically my guide for more advanced shapes. It's very noodly. Any questions about that? Any of those things that I just went over? We'll be doing some practice with those here in just a second. So what I'd like to have folks do is the thing that I think can kind of bring all of these tools together. Oh, not getting the points to appear for the new Pali shape. So for new Pali shape, you click, and then you're just clicking in space to set those points. And then you drag up and down to scale how tall you want the object to be. The new game object that it creates goes away the second I click. When you're clicking new Pali shape, there shouldn't be anything until you start clicking. And then it should start putting points. And then you drag up and click again. The point never appears. Let's see. Unfortunately, I don't use this tool very often, so I don't have a great sense of like what might be causing issues with it. So Unfortunately, I'm not going to be the most helpful for troubleshooting issues with the new Pali shape tool. It's sort of a newer tool to me, and I unfortunately don't know all the ins and outs of it. Cool. Yeah, sorry I don't know more about what might be causing issues with that. So for the next like 10 minutes, what I'd like to have folks do is I think a good thing to try and do is build an arched doorway that brings together kind of some of these skills of like extruding, moving individual like edges and vertices or faces, and just try to get a arched doorway that sits flush with one of your walls. So go ahead and spend some time trying to figure out how you might do that. And if anybody has questions, I can kind of like help guide you along. I'm just going to quickly do that along with everybody, but try to do it based on the information that you have so far, and then ask questions rather than watching how I do it and copying what I do. Because I think if you kind of like bash your head against it a little, trying to figure out how to do it, that'll give you a stronger sense of how the tools work than replicating exactly what I do. So go ahead and create an arched doorway that fits flush with your walls. Something that can be helpful when you're lining things up is the isometric view as opposed to the perspective view. You like really want to quickly be able to see how things are lined up, and you can get between those by clicking the direction at the bottom of your sort of what do they call this? Your sort of like transform widget. Feel free to ask questions anytime you're running into anything, and I'm happy to help guide you. Am I planning on trying anything new with ProBuilder for summer slow jams? I am sure I will use ProBuilder for something in summer slow jams. I try to get myself to like push myself on anything that I do. I'm sure I'll find some new thing that I have to do in it. Have you played around with any of the Boolean functionality? I ran into loads of issues a while ago trying to construct a big plane with holes in it. Yes, the Boolean functionality is super experimental right now and works maybe like 50% of the time. I tend to do a lot of extruding and shaping objects that way to get around having to punch holes in things. I can say that the Boolean tools in Unreal Editor or Unreal Engine are really good. They're level design tools. If you get a good feel of ProBuilder, feel roughly the same, but Unreal Engine's Boolean tools work great. I've spent like maybe 2 hours in Unreal Engine, and coming from ProBuilder, it was very easy to get started for me. I'm looking forward to when the Boolean tools work better because they're incredibly useful. Does anybody who's working on their arch having any issues that they wanna talk about? Let's see if I can show off the. I'm just gonna mess with the Boolean tool real quick to see if I can show how it works. I don't recommend messing with it too much because it doesn't super work right now. Oh, I did that backwards. But I wanted to do this. What it does is it creates a new game object that has the geometry of your one object minus the other object. That's the Boolean tools that Dice Game is talking about, Henry. Can I slice the arch with a plane? So like you want to use a plane to cut the arch into two pieces? Is that kind of what you're looking to do? You might chop off the top so that it's flat. Um, you might be able to do that using the Boolean tools, but the Boolean tools are experimental and don't work half the time. What I would recommend is try playing around with the position of the edges and the vertices rather than an entire face to flatten the top of it. I'm not familiar with what conform normals does. I think that is I think that's something to do with the UVs, which we'll talk about in a minute here. All right. We'll give it one more minute to work on the arch doorways, and then we'll move on to the UV editor. Had a shape tool there for a while, but it's disappeared again. Is there a way to open it for an existing object or only for new objects? It only works for new objects. It's building new geometry rather than affecting existing geometry. If you hit Control Shift K on your keyboard, does that bring up any windows? I wonder if it's popping under somewhere. It creates a new arch, but you don't see the window to adjust the arch. But you can't alter the various properties. Oh, yeah. So you can't once the arch is built, you have to use the like the tools here, the vertices, edge, and face selection to adjust your arch. You can only adjust can only use the options that are in the new shape window when you're building the new shape. Once it's built, you have to adjust it using the selection tools. So you kind of want to like get an idea of your like radius and depth and dimensions that way when you're building it. And that's when it can be good to drag your shape into kind of into the area of what you're building it around to get that sense of proportion. Then hit build once you've got that set, and then you can start moving from there to create, kind of adjust it to fit the scene better. All right. The next thing we're going to take a look at, and this is going to be the last thing we look at for this workshop, is getting UVs lined up. UVs, I'm not super technical on what a UV actually is, but the UV editor is how you're going to make sure that your textures line up with each other and look correct that way. So you can see here, my arch does not line up with the walls around it. That's not something that we want. We want this to like line up with these other walls. So we're going to select this object and hit UV editor down here on our ProBuilder window. So you can see this is like all of the faces, all of these here represent faces in the world. So if I select a face here, you can see it selects here. If I select multiple faces, you can see, select multiple faces, you can see that they're selecting multiple faces over here. All right. When you're shift selecting multiples, is there an unselect button? I know undo will unselect the last picked. No worries. So if you're shift selecting, you should be able to control select to unselect faces. It might be command select on Mac. So if I've shift selected a bunch of faces, should be able to hold control and click to unselect some. All right, so my UV is kind of a mess here. It doesn't line up, and I want to make sure that it does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one face and just get that one face lined up. And you can move the face around here, and that will move it. But that's kind of like, it's weird to try moving it here to like get an idea of it. So I'm going to select this lock the scene view handle button here at the top of my UV editor. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to take advantage of ProGrids, and it allows me to move the UV in the scene. So now I can just move that one half increment. Now it lines up, and you can see the rest of my object still does not. There's a easy way, once you've got one piece of your object lined up, to line up the rest of your object. And that is the auto stitch tool. So if you hold Control, if you have one face selected, this face that you have correct and you've got in the right spot, hold Control and click through your remaining faces, and you can see it's moving those faces to line up with the one I had selected initially. And just go through and select each of those faces, and it will stitch them together automatically. So you can see now everything lines up. And we can do this on the other side as well. So we can grab one face, get it lined up, and then auto stitch the rest of our UV to line up. And let's do that on the inside. Doing it across an arc is apparently a little problematic. It doesn't totally line up. So what we'll do is I'm going to adjust the snap on this to get this lined up. I'm going to bring that back up to 0.5, and I'm going to have this side lined up with itself and this side lined up with itself. So it kind of fits together a little better. And just to give an idea of how like the relationships here work, you can see this right here is my texture, this square with 1 meter on it. That's my texture that's wrapping across everything. It's just tiling across the object. How this works is that each of these spots is just looping back over across this UV. So you can just like, as long as it's kind of incremented correctly, it'll just loop perfectly across your objects. You can, if it's easier for you to think about it in terms of like lining up the UV directly to the object, you can do that. Like, let's say we wanted to line this one up to, where'd it go? We wanted to line that up here and get it kind of like set to this piece and then auto stitch it. That gives you kind of like a clearer visual as to what's happening here. Just like looping around. This same texture is just being looped over and over across the object. And I did not line that up perfectly, so I'm just gonna restitch that. Does anybody have questions about that? About auto stitching to get your UVs lined up? So this auto stitching feature is useful also if you're going to be exporting your UVs out to paint them in another program. If you want to get like a really nice unwrap of your object, you can use that auto stitching to decide where everything's going to be in relation to each other. That's a little beyond my knowledge, unfortunately. I don't really do a lot of the texturing myself. Usually I'm working with somebody who is great at that stuff and will take care of it. Let's see, I'm just trying to get this lined up. They'll take care of creating that, the unwraps or whatever, and I'll just kind of put them on in Unity. That's not where my strong suit is. Um, but it's something that I hope to learn. I hope to get better at that. Have I ever wrapped something in pixel art? Uh, so the textures in Nasty Little Man are pretty small. I think I can't remember exactly how small they are, but they're they're pretty small. So I think you could do that as long as your textures are, repeatable and I think you could easily do that. You could probably export your UV unwrap to another program, just paint pixel art over the top of it, and then bring that material and texture in and get it lined up, and you'd probably be good to go. I think that should be be pretty easily doable. Hmm. Yeah, that's basically what we did for Nasty Little Man. Is we have like can't remember the size of them unfortunately, but they're very small textures that we just that Leah made in I think Procreate, and then I overlaid them using the UV editor. Um, but most of them were like repeating patterns, so it didn't really matter, or like really flat patterns. So it rarely mattered how the seams lined up. But yeah, that's how I think you would do that. If you wanted like a real detailed pixel painting on your object, you could export the UV out, paint it in another program, and then bring that in as a texture on a material to throw it on your object. Um, so that brings us to the end of what I had planned. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions, and if anybody wants to like just mess around with making stuff for a while, I'm happy to answer any questions about whatever y'all might be doing. Um, for a total noob, would this workflow be easier or exporting to Blender and using Magic UV? Uh, I don't know anything about Blender. So if you know how to use Blender, it might be easier to export out to Blender and use Magic UV for that. Um, yeah, I would say if you're a 3D artist, use whatever tools work the best for you. Um, that this is the tool that I know the best of any 3D tools, so it's what I'm most familiar with. But if you have familiarity with other tools that you can work faster in, I'd say use whatever you're fastest and most efficient in. Thanks for coming, Drew. I hope that this was helpful in some way. Yeah, so yeah, again, I'm just going to stick around if y'all want to just build stuff in ProBuilder and ask questions. I'm here to answer any questions that I can. Happy to field questions. Happy to help. I know everything I know about making games because of PIGSquad, and nothing makes me happier than in some way trying to give back to this fantastic community. So I'm super happy to do this. PIGSquad is a fantastic organization for anybody who's not familiar, and uh, yeah, very happy to be doing this workshop for y'all. Absolutely, no problem. Here to help. I got my increment too small, and I was starting to get gaps places. Gotta remember to keep that increment in a usable sort of amount. Is there a canned WASD movement script? Oh, for like a player controller. Um, I think there is some stuff. I had I unfortunately I had intended to build one of those and upload a project with it to use in this, so you could like kind of move around your space. Um, let me see. I wonder how quickly I could get this uploaded to somewhere where it would be usable. um, yeah, I think it might be a little late for me to upload this now, but I do have like a script with an input system here that I'm using, that you have to use the new input system for. But I don't have one I can like really quickly send. Oh, thanks. I'm I'm I hope it was helpful. I I love ProBuilder, and I would love to see more people like experimenting and building weird stuff with it. To the asset store. Yeah, I'm sure there's a good like player controller on the asset store somewhere. But it's so dark in here. There's no lights down there. Throw some colored point lights in there and look at how much mood there is already. You know what? Let's grab all three of these and turn on soft shadows. Instant mood. Anybody messing around in ProBuilder and have any questions? Awesome. I hope you find the community as awesome and helpful as I do. All right, I think we're going to wrap up. So I just want to go over really quickly where you can find ProBuilder and ProGrids in Unity real quick, and then we'll call it good. If you want to find ProBuilder, it's going to be in the package manager. Search for ProBuilder. You can install it here. Then ProGrids requires the preview packages to be enabled. Then you can do ProGrids, find it there. The tools will let you open the windows. And I think that is it. So thank you everybody who came and checked out this workshop. I hope it was helpful. I love ProBuilder. It's what I use in almost every game project that I do now. Hopefully you can start to use it and play around with it. Not just in first person stuff, but third person, you can use it in 2D. You need to create something that's 2D. Play around with it. I'd love to see what you make, and I'll see you all at PIGSquad. Thanks again, and bye. Oh, I switched to the wrong